Life on the ranch had been repetitive for years before any of this happened. The kind of repetition that dulls your sense of time without ever feeling boring. Morning chores, fence checks, evening feed, and then a drink on the porch while the sun sank behind the fields. Most nights were quiet enough that the radio felt louder than it should. That evening, the local station mentioned a meteor shower expected over western Nebraska. Clear skies, good visibility, something folks in town might step outside to watch for a few minutes before going back in. I remember half listening, more focused on the cattle settling down and the glass in my hand than anything happening above us. It didn't seem important. I finished my drink, shut off the radio, and went to bed. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a sound. It wasn't sharp or explosive, just sudden enough to pull me out of sleep. A deep tearing noise, like heavy fabric being forced apart under strain. My first thought was a car backfiring on the highway or fireworks from town, though neither explanation really fit the hour. I lay there for a moment, listening. Nothing followed. After a minute, I got up and checked the window facing the fields. The night looked the same as it always did. No light, no movement. Just darkness and the faint outline of the pasture under the stars. I told myself it was nothing and went back to sleep. The next morning started like every other. Coffee before sunrise, boots by the door, a slow walk out to check the herd before the heat set in. That's when I noticed the cattle weren't spread across the pasture the way they should have been. They were clustered in one corner near the western fence, packed close together, restless and uneasy. None of them were grazing. A few lifted their heads when they saw me, but their attention kept drifting back toward the northern end of the ranch. I called for the dog and headed out to see what had them spooked. He followed me as far as the truck, then stopped. No amount of coaxing would get him to step onto the grass. He stood there whining softly, eyes fixed on the open pasture, body low and tense, like he could already see something I couldn't. I went on alone. The closer I got to the northern pasture, the quieter it became. Not suddenly, gradually. The insects thinned out, then vanished entirely. The smell reached me before I saw anything. Not rot, not smoke. Something damp and metallic, like wet iron left too long in shade. The grass ahead lay flattened in a wide circle, darkened as if soaked overnight even though the rest of the field was dry. At the center was a burned patch of earth, 10 or 12 feet across, pressed inward rather than scorched. The soil looked fused, smooth and glossy. In the middle of it was a narrow hole. Inside the hole was a thick black substance, dark enough that it swallowed light unevenly. Its surface rose and fell slowly, almost imperceptibly, and the longer I stared at it, the more I had the uncomfortable sense that it wasn't liquid so much as something holding its shape out of habit. Later that morning, the radio mentioned the meteor again. A streak of light seen overnight, burned up before impact, they said. Standing there by the hole, I didn't connect the two. By the second day, several cattle stopped responding to sound entirely. One cow stood motionless near the fence for hours, sides heaving in deep, exaggerated breaths. When I approached, she didn't flinch or turn her head. Her eyes were dull, unfocused, and when I ran my hand along her flank, I felt firm nodules beneath the hide that hadn't been there before. By evening, one of them went down. She didn't thrash or cry out. Her legs simply gave way, and she lay there breathing too slowly, mouth opening and closing as if air felt heavier than it should. I assumed it was some infection I hadn't dealt with before, bad water, parasites, something local. That's when I called the vet. He arrived early the next morning and went quiet almost immediately. He checked temperature, heart rate, reflexes. Everything fluctuated in ways that didn't line up with any illness he recognized. When he parted the fur along the cow's neck, thick black boils were visible beneath the skin, swollen and stretched thin, pulsing faintly as if responding to pressure from within. When he lanced one, black fluid spilled out, viscous and glossy, clinging to the blade instead of dripping. It smelled faintly metallic and burned his gloves where it touched. Beneath the boil, the tissue had softened unnaturally, muscle fibers rearranged into something fibrous and wrong. He stepped back and said he'd never seen anything like it. He suggested contamination, something environmental. He asked about unusual events, fires, spills, impacts. I mentioned the Meteor. I didn't mention the hole. Over the next 2 days, cattle began dying, not all at once, not violently, one by one, quietly, as their bodies failed to hold their shape. More boils appeared, spreading along necks, rib cages, flanks. Some burst on their own, leaking black fluid that soaked into the soil and left pale, brittle patches of grass behind. The remaining cattle didn't avoid the sick ones. They stood near them, heads lowered, breathing slow, as if proximity mattered more than survival. Several developed the same growths within hours. That was when I noticed the ground near the hole had changed. Thin black filaments extended from it at night and withdrew again by morning, leaving frost-white scars in the dirt where they had touched. The substance in the hole had risen closer to the surface, pressing upward, bulging against the soil as if testing how much resistance it would meet. I stopped sleeping much. One night, after helping the vet load another body for disposal, I went inside and washed my hands longer than necessary. The water ran clear, but the sink filled with a faint metallic smell that hadn't been there before. When I leaned closer to the mirror, I noticed something dark tracing through the whites of my eyes. Thin veins, black instead of red. They branched outward from the corners and shifted slightly when I blinked, not reacting so much as adjusting. I stared at them for a long time, gripping the edge of the sink, waiting for my reflection to look like it used to. It didn't. As I turned away, my eyes drifted down the hallway out of habit, toward rooms that hadn't been used in years. My wife had passed a long time ago. The kids had moved to the city, built lives that didn't involve early mornings or fence lines or cattle. The house had been quiet long before any of this started, and I had learned to mistake that quiet for safety. Later that night, I felt an itch along my lower back. I told myself it was sweat, stress, anything ordinary. When I checked, I found 3 small black boils clustered just above my waistline, glossy and swollen, skin stretched thin over them. They pulsed faintly, not in time with my heartbeat, but slower, steadier, like they were following a rhythm I hadn't been listening for before. I picked up my phone and thought about calling someone. The authorities, state health, anyone who might know what to do. My thumb hovered over my children's names instead. I tried to imagine explaining it to them. The cattle, the black fluid, the veins in my eyes, something moving under my skin. I tried to imagine telling them not to come home without telling them why. There was no version of that conversation where distance meant safety. I put the phone down. Outside, the pasture was silent. The cattle that were still alive stood facing the same direction, heads lifted, breathing in unison, eyes fixed on the place where the ground had opened. I felt something shift beneath the skin along my arm, slow and deliberate, tracing paths as if mapping where it would be easiest to spread next. Whatever fell from the sky didn't arrive to destroy anything. It arrived to understand how living things persist beyond a single body. And lying awake in that quiet house, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had already moved on without me, I realized with a certainty colder than fear that it wouldn't need me for very long.